Assalamualaikum and hello ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our seminar. Today we are going to discover about MSG versus sodium chloride. Which one is better? But before answering that question, why not we begin with exploring MSG first? You probably heard that MSG is bad for you. But wait, what is MSG anyway? In 1968, Dr. Robert Holman Cook fell ill after dinner at a Chinese restaurant. He wrote a letter detailing his symptoms to a prestigious medical journal, pondering whether his illness had resulted from eating monosodium glutamate, also known as MSG. Cook's connection between his headache and this common seasoning in American Chinese cuisine was just a hunch. But his letter would dramatically change the world relationship with MSG, inspiring international panic, bioscience, and sensational journalism. So what is this mysterious seasoning? Where does it come from? MSG. These three letters have quite a bit of interest behind them. It stands for monosodium glutamate, which is a mixture of two substances. To make it, firstly, to take one of the basic building blocks that make up the protein, one of the amino acid, glutamic acid, that found in numerous plant and animal proteins, it plays a key role in our digestion, muscle function, and immune system. Secondly, you need a sodium, which is well established as an essential part of our diet. Then, there it is, MSG, C5H8NO4Na. However, why do we love this molecule so much? Well, it's all thanks to umami. What is umami? I hear you cry. Well, our body produces enough glutamate for our digestion, muscle function, and immune system, but the molecule is also present in our diet. You can taste its signature savory flavor in foods like mushroom, cheese, tomatoes, and broth. Chasing this rich flavor is what led to MSG invention in 1908. A Japanese chemist named Kakune Ikeda was trying to isolate the molecule responsible for a unique flavor he called umami, meaning a pleasant savory taste. Today, umami is recognized as one of the 5 basic tastes in food science. In the case of umami, those mechanisms arise when we cook or ferment certain food, breaking down their protein and releasing amino acids like glutamate. But Ikeda found a savory shortcut to producing this chemical reaction by isolating high quantity of glutamate from a bowl of noodle broth and combine them with another flavor enhancer like sodium. He created a seasoning that instantly increased the umami of any dish. The result was a major success. So basically, the flavor enhancing effect of MSG are due to its umami taste, which induce salivary secretion. Though it naturally occurs in some food, MSG is also commonly added to fast food and also processed items like canned vegetable, condiments including ketchup, mustard, and salad dressing, potato chips, soup, and soy sauce.
Thank you, Ms. Laila, for the explanation of MSG. Next, I will explain about sodium chloride. Sodium chloride, also known as salt, which is commonly referred as table salt by most people. There must be someone wondering and curious how sodium chloride or this salt exists in this world. Is that salt is essential for human body? Sodium chloride is a form of ionic bonding of two ions that have different elements, which is a sodium ions that are metal and chloride ions are non-metal. The combination of these compounds produce a chemical compound called salt. In chemical terms, salt are ionic compounds. As salt dissolves on solution or on food, it breaks into its components, which is sodium and chloride respectively. The salty flavor primarily comes from the sodium ions. Due to its saltiness, salt is one of the most widely used for food seasoning. According to a review study by Klaus et al. 2012, entitled Sodium Intake and its Reduction by Food Reformulation in the European Union, the author stated that In sodium chloride, which is salt, it consists of 40% of sodium and 60% of chloride by weight. And as the fact that 90% of sodium in the human diet is come from the salt. The primary source of dietary sodium is sodium chloride, or salt, more than 3/4 of which comes from processed food. The most abundant source of dietary salt human in industrial country can obtain is when they consume a lot of processed food, then followed by the salt added during cooking and the salt that naturally present in a food. According to the study, in industrial nation, about 5 to 10% of dietary salt is found naturally in the foods that people eat, while the other 10 to 15% is added during cooking on the table, and around 75 to 80% of dietary salt is obtained through the consumption of processed food. In contrast, salt used for seasoning significantly more significant in developing country. For instance, in China, this makes up about 76% of all salt intake. Throughout the world, processed food typically have sodium level that is many times higher than natural foods. A study of processed foods in Australia found that sauces and spreads have the highest salt content, which is about 1280 mg per 100 gram, followed by processed meat, which is 850 mg over 100 gram, snacks 800 mg per 100 gram, fish products 510 mg over 100 gram, and bread and bakery goods 470 mg over 100 grams, and the lower salt food groups were processed fruits and vegetables, and also cereals products. A similar study conducted in the United Kingdom detected lower sodium levels in bread and bakery products, meat, sauces, and spreads. In majority European countries, a few staple food items are responsible for the highest percent of salt. For instance, bread, cereals, and bakery products are currently the main dietary source of salt. Typically, these are followed by meat and meat products, then cheese and dairy products. In some Eastern European countries such as Czech Republic, Poland, and Romania, the majority of dietary salt intake comes from salt used in cooking. According to all this research, processed food salt level differs significantly between nations and probably between marketplaces.
Hi, I am Nadia, and I will proceed with the fact and fiction that has been going around regarding the intake of sodium and MSG. First, MSG. Have you ever been warned not to eat food with MSG because it contains high amount of sodium? It is said that since sodium is closely related to hypertension, the incorporation of MSG in food product will multiple the effects of sodium in hypertension cases. Is this information correct? Well, that's not true. Unlike regular table salt, which generally contains 40% of sodium, monosodium glutamate only has 12% of sodium content, which is a lot less than salt. In a study about the effect of glutamate incorporation into food products, it shows that MSG can be the alternative to salt due to its lower sodium content. This will result in the reduction of sodium intake and improving the health of the general public. Based on the same study, since currently there is no perfectly viable substitute for replacing sodium in food product, MSG is actually a good start for reducing sodium intake while still maintaining the palatability of the food. Other than hearing a word from the street about how MSG is high in sodium, it is also fairly common to hear that MSG cannot be processed by the body effectively. This is not scientifically accurate. First of all, MSG is a naturally occurring compound that can easily be found in carrot, cabbage, anchovies, and many other food types. It can also be the product of fermentation of animal-based and plant-based food like molasses, sugarcane, and beans. Secondly, the body has numerous glutamate receptors throughout the gut and the nervous system that is making the processing and digesting the component possible. Whether the consumed glutamate is in the form of from the natural sources or from food additives, body can still metabolize it, unlike what has been talked among the general public. There is a study that dives into how the consumption of MSG actually increases the expression of glutamate receptors and transporters in the gastrointestinal tract of young piglets. So yeah, our body can and have no problem digesting and processing MSG. Next, the Chinese restaurant syndrome. Have you ever heard of it? This term started to exist when, as researcher Dr. Ho Man Kwok wrote about symptoms he experienced after dining at a Chinese restaurant in the US. Due to xenophobia and anti-Chinese sentiments to the Chinese migrant workers, the media used the researchers' concerns to encourage mistrust to this group of people and their cuisine. When this syndrome is studied by a group of researchers in India, there are severe reaction to MSG that can lead to fatal outcomes if not treated in time. However, an older study about the prevalence of the syndrome showed that less than 2% of the study's respondents experienced unpleasant symptoms possibly related to MSG. Aside from that, the Food and Drug Administration (FDA) received reports of headache and nausea after consuming food that contained MSG. But still, the FDA never able to confirm that the symptoms were actually caused by MSG. Next is sodium. Salt is made up of 40% sodium, which is a very important compound to maintain good health. However, unfortunately, there is also many misconceptions around the consumption of salt in daily life. I am sure every one of us know what pink Himalayan salt is. This salt is usually associated with positive effects on health. Based on a study on the pink Himalayan salt content, it is true that the pink salt is rich in mineral content. It has up to 84 different types of minerals. However, the salt compound itself is made up of sodium chloride, making up to 98% of the salt content, leaving only 2% for all the variety minerals that the salt has. And this very small amount is not significant in bringing health benefits to the consumers. The second misconception about salt is that increased blood pressure is the only negative health effect of salt. It is true that salt increases blood pressure, and constant high intake of salt is risky for those with hypertension. Plus, since our body systems are connected, one disease can cause other diseases. Thus, salt intake not only increase blood pressure, but it can also cause diseases like heart and kidney disease, which will increase the risk for stroke, which then connected to vision loss and some cancers. Based on a study on the impact of high sodium consumption in human health, stated that high sodium intake has also been linked with stomach cancer, obesity, metabolic syndrome, autoimmunity, chronic kidney disease, kidney stones, and osteoporosis. With all of that being said, it is important to note that there are a lot of misconceptions going around the society about food. The general public needs to be educated deeply using scientific-based evidences to ensure that everyone can make better health decisions without the influence of rumors. That's all from me. Thank you.
After hearing to the myth and fact that's stated by Ms. Jihan, then I would like to tell you guys what is advantage and disadvantage of MSG. MSG enhancement of flavor encourage appetite, an advantage in medical situation where people lack the desire to eat through age or illness and need to be encouraged to take food. Another benefit is sodium reduction. It can be substituted for the extra salt often added to many processed food, since it contains only 1/3 amount of sodium than table salt does. MSG has many business advantages for the food industry, including its cheapness and easy availability, but its biggest advantage is that it encourages people to buy more of the industry's product. The biggest and perhaps the most well-known reason for avoiding MSG is food are the suspected links to negative health. This article, focusing on MSG toxicity, results from both animal and human studies have demonstrated that administration of even the lowest dose of MSG has toxic effect. MSG will lead to different disorders. First is obesity. MSG consumption set a precedent for the development of obesity later on. Insulin resistance and reduced glucose tolerance in rodents due to MSG consumption raise concern about the development of obesity in MSG consuming humans. The same study revealed that MSG intake causes a disrupted energy balance by increasing the palatability of food and disturbing the leptin-mediated hypothalamus signaling cascade, potentially leading to obesity. Next, some people who may have a hypersensitivity to MSG and consume food with it as an ingredient may experience the following adverse reaction known as MSG symptom complex, such as headache, sweating, facial pressure or tightness, numbness, tingling or burning in the face, neck and other area, heart palpitations and nausea. Thus, although MSG has proven its value as an enhancer of flavor, different studies have hinted at possible toxic effects related to this popular food additive. Therefore, a moderate amount of this savory seasoning seems like to be a safe way to make a little tastier. That's all for me. Next, we move to the next presenter.
So, what sodium chloride does to the human body? In the human diet, salt is the primary source of sodium and chloride ions. It is a crucial substance that the human body uses to transport and absorb nutrients in order to keep blood pressure stable and maintain the ideal fluid balance for human health. Every cell in our body requires salt to functioning, particularly the sodium ions found in its sodium chloride molecule. Compounds containing sodium and potassium are electrolytes, substances that dissolve in water and produce ions. The resulting solution produces an electric current. In the human body, many processes require electrical signal for communication, especially in the nervous system, brains and muscle. For example, sodium ions are necessary to generate those electric signals. For specific, sodium itself is essential for nerve and muscle function and is important for the maintenance of cellular membrane potential and the absorption of nutrients in the small intestine. Furthermore, its presence determines the volume of extracellular fluid, thereby play a role in maintaining and control body's blood pressure and volume. While chloride ions function as vital electrolytes by controlling blood pressure and pH. In solvent like water, electrolytes, often salt, dissociate into their ionic components. Additionally, chlorides plays a critical role in the production of stomach acid, HCl. As we know, humans excrete salt when sweating, so they must replenish these low sodium and chloride ions through their diet. Although sodium is necessary, consume too much of it may have adverse health effects, the most concerning of which is elevated blood pressure. In most European countries, the prevalence of hypertension exceeds 40% and is particularly high in Eastern European nations like the Czech Republic, Slovenia and Hungary, where the sodium intake is frequently very high. Hypertension is a major risk factor for cardiovascular disease, the leading cause of deaths worldwide. Accounts for 62% of strokes and 49% of coronary heart disease. So, how can you know whether the sodium you take daily is adequate in healthy way for you and can prevent you from hypertension? You can estimate your daily intake of salt by paying attention to the nutrition labels on food. If you are athlete and eat low salt diet, you might getting too little salt. However, if you eat a lot of processed food, you may be getting more salt than you need. as it's probably clear for you by now, moderation is the good option. Other than that, to prevent disease such as high blood pressure, non-communicable disease (NCD), Section Disease Control Division, Ministry Health Malaysia and Department of Dietetic and Food Service, Hospital Selayang, has also provided guidelines about salt intake in a day. The amount that should be taken is about 5 grams, which is 1 teaspoon level, equivalent to 2000 milligrams. Here has also provided a method to identify the sodium content in food using the sodium point system. Sodium intake can be divided into two, namely the first, the addition of sodium during food preparation and during meals. The second is the selection of food outsides. They suggest that 1 point is equivalent to 200 milligrams of sodium. So, in a day, an individual must take 10 points, which will make the total sodium intake is 2000 milligrams. 2 points, which is 400 milligrams, can be taken from natural foods, while another 8 points are for side dishes or main dishes. According to the estimates, if the average person reduced their daily salt intake by about 5 grams to the amount about 3 grams, there will be a reduction in getting strokes about 23% and cardiovascular disease by 17%, averting an estimated 4 million deaths worldwide each year. He, Lee and McGregor conducted a meta-analysis that showed how cutting back on salt could lower blood pressure in both hypertensive and normotensive patients. The authors concluded that although a reduction to 5 grams salt per day has a positive effect on blood pressure, a further reduction to 3 grams salt a day would have a much greater effect.
Now, I will cover an overview on monosodium glutamate combined with high lipid diet provokes metabolic alterations and systemic anomalies. Nowadays, people are busy with their technology-based busy work schedules in different sectors. So, they have very minimal time preparing their meals and engaging in physical activities. For these reasons, most of them will buy ready-made foods or junk foods. Most of the ready-made foods have harmful effects on human health due to higher percentage of saturated fatty acids, trans fatty acids, and hydrogenated fats in the form of high lipid diet. So, let's take a look at MSG causes systemic anomalies. When monosodium glutamate mixed with foods that contain high lipid, it will induce systemic anomalies. For instance, MSG in ready-made foods has been linked to nephrotoxicity, hepatotoxicity, asthma, urticaria, neoplastic cell growth, and differentiation. Additionally, a study from Food Science and Safety 2019 also stated that MSG induced cardiac tissue damage, metabolic changes, overweight, liver toxicity, and fibrosis. Monosodium glutamate causes Chinese restaurant syndrome by showing some symptoms such as back neck burn, dizziness, and blistering on arms, which occur just 20 minutes after taking a ready-made foods rich in MSG. Besides, extensive use of monosodium glutamate causes deoxyribonucleic acid DNA damage, protein modification, and some other reproductive abnormalities as MSG binds to glutamate receptors. Next is the impact of MSG on the cardiovascular system. By a study by Conrad, he proposed that MSG associates with hypertension, bradycardia, and vagus sympathetic effects. Moreover, MSG-induced obesity developed by the extra fats accumulation in adipose tissue due to cholesterol upregulation, which leads to cardiovascular disorders. The higher the daily salt intake, the higher the systolic blood pressure. Therefore, we need to reduce our dietary sodium or salt intake because it helps in reducing blood pressure and cardiovascular morbidity and mortality. So, there are many mechanisms that link high salt intake and hypertension, which are water retention, expansion of circulatory volume, increased cardiac output, increased renal perfusion pressure, and increased glomerular filtration rate. Let's take a look at figure 1 to know the mechanism that link high salt intake and hypertension. First mechanism is water retention, which occur when your body retains water and creating temporary fluid weight gain. High salt intake leads to more water retention, which causes circulatory volume to expand, cardiac output increase, and a rise in kidney perfusion pressure. When the kidney perfusion pressure is increased, the glomerular filtration rate increases and sodium excretion increases to restore the fluid balance in the body. This is called pressure natriuresis mechanism as shown in figure 1. When the sodium excretory ability of the kidney is compromised, hypertension may develop. However, some other studies show that the circulating volumes and the cardiac output were similar among salt-sensitive and salt-insensitive individuals. They explain these findings by the non-osmotic storage of sodium, meaning that sodium may be stored in the body without water retention.
Now, you guys have already heard a lot about MSG and sodium chloride. So right now, I am going to compare different studies about MSG versus sodium chloride. For our first study, which titled The Salt Clip, Sensory Mitigation of Salt Reduction with Monosodium Glutamate in Better For You Foods by Jeremiah Halim, Ali Bowsari, Dan Felder, and Jane. The objective of this study is to investigate the mitigation of salt and sodium reduction in 4 plant-for weight. The method for these studies is used 4 dishes. First, roasted vegetable. Second, a quinoa bowl. A third, savory yogurt dip. And lastly, pork and cauliflower fried rice, where each of the dishes have 3 versions. First, a standard recipe with a typical salt content for the dish. Second, a reduced salt recipe. And lastly, the same reduced salt recipe with MSG added, where total sodium was still substantially lower than in the standard recipe. To add, over 163 consumers participate in this study. The consumers need to evaluate the appearance, flavor, and texture of the dishes. For the result, the researchers state that the dish with MSG lead in every category in terms of appearance, flavor, and texture. Now, we will move to the discussion where for the MSG mitigation of salt and sodium reduction, the study findings support the hypothesis that MSG can be added to plant-forward better for you dishes in which salt has been substantially reduced to maintain or even improve consumer acceptance and still achieve significant sodium reduction. It also states that the FDA standard for a reduced sodium product is at least 25% less sodium than the original product. In this study, the application of MSG was successful in reducing sodium level by more than 30% from standard recipe. This highlights the potential of MSG application in the formulation of reduced sodium foods. Moreover, for the pork and the cauliflower fried rice dish, the MSG application reduced sodium by as much as 60%. This definitely meets the FDA requirements for light and sodium labeling. Lastly is the conclusion. The researchers conclude that MSG can successfully be used to mitigate salt and sodium reduction without compromising consumer acceptance of particularly in complex dishes. Now, let's move to the second study. Based on this study, interaction of monosodium glutamate and sodium chloride on saltiness and palatability of clear soup by Shizuko Yamaguchi and Chikahito Takahashi. The objective of this study is to examine the functional relation between MSG and sodium chloride concentration in a clear soup which cause somashi jiru, and the effect on saltiness and palatability by a response surface method. For the materials and method, this study involved 50 men and 40 women, where all of them are around 20 to 40 years old with a mean age 28 years old. All of them had experience in the consumer acceptance test, threshold test, and other sensory evaluation tests on foods. And for the test sample, a traditional Japanese clear soup flavored with a stock made from dried bonito was used. 9 clear soups with various concentration of MSG and sodium chloride were prepared. For the result, in evaluation of palatability, at low concentration of NaCl, higher concentration of MSG give maximum palatability score. Moreover, the researchers state that reduction in the NaCl concentration without adding MSG greatly decreased the palatability score. In other words, addition of MSG increased the palatability score. Lastly, is the discussion. This study suggested that to maintain a high palatability score with a restricted sodium intake, the MSG concentration should be kept at an optimum and the NaCl concentration reduced. This is a way to reduce the total sodium intake without influencing the palatability of food. In conclusion, if we are only comparing the taste, then salt is just salty. On the other hand, MSG is not only salty, but it also gives an umami taste. It is important to keep an eye on your sodium intake. From overly salty sauces and frequent meals eaten out to food delivered to your doorstep, most of us are eating too much sodium. So, before you buy, make it a habit to flip over the package and read the food label. To add, MSG offers a lower sodium alternative. But remember, turning to fresh food is always the best. Lastly, we hope that you guys get a clear understanding about MSG and sodium chloride. That's all from us. Thank you.